is what they're dealing with. Like, how do I continuously create a space, this like space of care that I'm caring for folk, and that includes their staff as well in hard times. And at the same time, recognizing that I cannot, there won't be any academic success or any social and emotional success unless I tend to who people are and how they feel inside the spaces.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, to another episode of All the Above, the show that gives you an unstandardized take on education. I'm Jeffrey Garrett, one of your co-hosts, and I've been a middle and high school principal and a high school social studies teacher. And as always, I'm joined by...
What up, family? It's Manuel Rustin, your favorite teacher's favorite teacher. I'm a high school history teacher out here in the Los Angeles area. This is year 20 in the classroom for me. And this here, of course, is All the Above, your home for news and analysis of all matters pertaining to our world of education. We absolutely want to shout out anybody who might be joining us for the very first time. We don't know if you came across us randomly in your podcast apps or in your YouTube algorithms, or if somebody recommended the show. But if somebody recommended our show to you, shout out to them too. We love it when the AOTA family lets the folks in their circles know about our show and these wonderful conversations that we have here, looking at education and centering the humanizing view of our students and marginalized perspectives that don't often make it into education discussions out there. Jeff, this is, I believe, the last full episode before Halloween. I think Halloween's in a couple days, depending on when folks watch this. So I have to ask you one last question regarding spooky season. Since you are Mr. Super Duper Dope Principal Leader Man, I want to know, which is scarier to you? Getting a phone call from your head custodian at like 5 a.m. talking about, boss, you got to come down here. You're going to want to see this. Or a late night email from a teacher with a subject line that reads, yeah, Principal Garrett, just so you know, don't want you to freak out. Which is more terrifying to you?
Oh, wow. Well, okay, here's the deal, Manuel. Those are both terrifying in their own way. Definitely don't want to receive either of those messages. I'm gonna have to go with the 5 a.m. from the head custodian, Manuel, because the thing is, it's all about time, right? So
yeah,
the email late night from the teacher, although inconvenient, potentially highly problematic, you do have a longer runway of time to respond to whatever the chaos and crisis is that is unfolding. Whereas, 5 a.m., you now are scrambling, rushing, you know what I mean? Everyone's asleep or just getting up and, commuting. So it's like, what resources do you have to do anything about this issue? And, oh, by the way, hundreds or in some cases thousands of kids are on their way to school and their parents need to drop them off and all that. So I'm going to say the head custodian 5 a.m. is slightly more terrifying, though both are ghoulish and ghastly scenarios. Very fitting for the Halloween season, Manuel.
Yeah. I can't call it as a classroom teacher. I don't know which would be worse to receive as an administrator, but I do believe both have been present in a lot of administrators' experiences out there in the profession. And I know as a high school teacher, especially around, towards the end of the year when it's like senior prank season, those phone calls or, those alerts from the head custodian at not convenient hours, I think those are very real for a lot of administrators out there. So, yeah, man, can't call it. But spooky season, we are looking at the last few days of that, and then it'll be Thanksgiving, Jeff, and we could talk about all the things we're thankful for in this beautiful world of ours where, everybody is free and everybody is viewed in a loving way, and, there's this utopia that we've created here in America, Jeff. So, Speaking of this utopia that we have here, Jeff, here on All of the Above, we talk about the education system. And of course, there's some challenges in it. So today we have a full episode. We're going to talk about a couple stories. And we also have a super dope guest in the building. And just a reminder for anybody who only engages with All of the Above via our YouTube channel, in between our full episodes, we do have audio only episodes that we call passing periods, where it's just Jeff and myself talking about the latest news in the world of education that maybe didn't make it into our full episode. So if you haven't subscribed to us on your favorite podcast streaming app, go ahead and do that. Like, what you waiting for? Go ahead and do that so you don't miss any of our content here. But Jeff, full episode today. Let us know, man, what's on the agenda for today's episode.
Well, Manuel, today we got a good one for everybody, as per usual. And very happy to say that our 109 episode streak of having only the dopest guests here on All the Above is fully intact, Manuel. And we are actually bringing back today's guest. She appeared with us a couple of years back, but talking mainly through the lens about engaging parents and specifically engaging Black families in the school system, or lack thereof, as it may be. But we are bringing back today, Manuel, Dr. Tonikiaa Orange, who is now the director of the Principal Leadership Institute at UCLA's Graduate School of Education at the Center X, which sort of houses many of the practitioner programs there. But she directs the program. And we're going to be digging into some conversation with her, Manuel, about kind of a whole swath of issues related to school leadership and what it means to be an administrator in this kind of post-pandemic crazy time, in the era of learning loss and in the era of, needing to sort of reclaim education and still provide a just and joyful education for our students. What does that look like through the lens of being a school leader? And we're also going to dig into some issues around sustainability in the profession, knowing that we have nationally, Manuel, a huge issue with the pipeline for school leadership of folks, moving around, not being able to sustain or retain at their school sites, and what that means for our profession. So going to be a fascinating conversation, Manuel, especially for folks out there who might be thinking about going into administration someday, or maybe current administrators, or if you are just someone who works at a school and knows the difference between what it's like to have a really effective administrator and what it's like to not have that in place. I think today's conversation is going to really resonate with you. So stick around, folks. You definitely don't want to miss it.
Sounds dope. And shout out all the school administrators who check out All of the Above. I believe at least one, maybe two of my administrators do. So shout out to y'all. All right, folks. But up next, we have our Do Now, where we take a look at news and headlines in the world of education. All right, stay tuned. All right, folks, now it's time for today's Do Now. Let's see what's going on in the world of education. Jeff, how are we going to do the Do Now today?
Well, Manuel, we're at about that mid-semester point for many districts around the country, Manuel. So it is only appropriate that we dig into a report card, Manuel. Time for some grades. Time to get some cell phones removed. Hint, hint. For some kids out there who might be bringing home less than ideal grades. Time for some Saturday chores, or time for a big old gold star and a hug from your parents for doing a great job. One of those things.
The days of bringing home grades. Yeah, it don't really work that anymore. Now it's just constant notifications and updates on their phones and emails and all that, and turn in an assignment, and then 5 minutes later, you didn't put my assignment in. I still have a 78.3. How do I get that to an 8? It's just incessant, this world of grades. Shout out to everybody out there, every educator out there who's made the move of going gradeless, and that is something that is still a challenge that I'm not at yet. But I know a lot of folks who listen to All the Above. So shout out to y'all. This percentage grade situation, not cool. But here we are, Jeff. We work in a system where this is kind of the way it's been for a very long time. And we have grades. And the first grade today, Jeff, is B. We got a B.
A B, solid. You will, you did all right, You have general mastery. Maybe not like deep mastery, but you're doing okay. Probably gonna stay out of trouble
what
with
can I
that
do to
grade.
get my grade up, though? I can't have a B. I need an A in this class. What is there extra credit I could do? Is there makeup work? What could I actually? I turned everything in. Why did I only get an 85% on the last thing I turned in?
You're making me have a flashback, Manuel, to 7th grade science, where I was that kid who had like a 78.8, and I was also the kid who would get in trouble if I. Pardon me. I was also the kid who would get in trouble if I brought home anything less than a B. And so I was in Mr. Lure's class, who was my 7th grade science teacher, after school, hustling whatever possible excuse I could think to get that rounded up, Manuel. I was like, look, if you round up these 3 assignments from like 79.3 to an 80, then it will raise my overall average to a 79.6, which is an 80. So can I just get the B? And honestly, I don't remember what he actually did in response to that. But I remember annoying him for probably a good hour after school.
Damn.
trying to hustle my way out of trouble. So I've been there. I understand.
Okay.
I understand the struggle, kids. Yes.
All right. Well, luckily for you, Jeff, this B has nothing to do with your GPA. It has nothing to do with your what grades you'll end up taking home. In fact, this B is about bans. We're going to talk about some banning happening, Jeff. And I know folks are thinking, book bans. I heard about that. We've talked about that a lot. Those are bad. This isn't so much about book bans. This is about banning cell phones. So let's dip into it. This comes to us by way of the 74 million, thanks to some reporting by Kevin Mencken. Shout out to him. We've referenced his stories and reporting several times on the show. And he reports that the United Kingdom's Secretary of State for Education issued new guidance recently requiring head teachers in England to ban pupils from using mobile phones for the entire school day. According to a UNESCO report released this summer on education systems in roughly 200 countries, about 1/4 have enacted comparable rules. It's doubtful that similar prohibitions can be attempted here in the U.S. since our schools are administered, of course, at the state and local level. However, young folks' phone use continues to stir debate among educators and families. Now, compelling research is starting to emerge, particularly out of Europe, on the effects of cell phone bans. A 2016 study found that across the large English cities of Birmingham, Leicester, London, and Manchester, dozens of high schools that instituted bans on mobile phones saw significant improvement in scores on high-stakes tests, Jeffrey's favorite kind of tests. A Danish study published in 2021 showed that a 4-week ban on phones during recess significantly increased the frequency and intensity of physical activity of children aged 10 to 14. Now, of course, good reason exists to doubt the efficacy of strict prohibitions on cell phones. According to data from the National Center for Education Statistics, during the 2019-2020 school year, 77% of public schools said they disallowed the non-academic use of phones during school hours. But a data analysis released earlier this year revealed that 97% of children aged 11 to 17 use their phones during the school day, which suggests that the restrictions were not actually widely observed. Well, Jeff, cell phones, the cell phone debate, it looks like the UK is taking a pretty big step, I would say, in requiring teachers across England, across all of England, to ban the use of phones during the day. Now, of course, we don't actually have details about how this ban in the UK is going to go. This is guidance that is just now emerging out of the UK, but the general idea of banning cell phones and banning cell phone use just flatly all the way out there. Jeff, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I absolutely, unequivocally love it, Manuel. Love it. LOVEIT! Exclamation point! Exclamation point! Love it. Okay. Now, let me qualify my love for this the policy that is, going to be adopted, it seems like, in the UK. I do agree with the points that the author made in the article around like the way that these kinds of policies function in society is that prohibition policies generally fail, right? Because it sets up an inherently adversarial relationship between, a set of authorities and the people being, having the authority waged over them. And it encourages underground black market behaviors to take shape, right? And so I don't think that just sort of like an edict from on high that says, henceforth, there shall be no cell phones on school campuses would be effective or is the right approach. And I think there were some other approaches named in the article that actually would, I think would be worth exploring, even though they will probably be imperfect. So Doug Lemov, who's, the sort of well-known educator, author of many books that folks have read, is cited in the article as talking about both the sort of data foundation for why this, could be a good policy, that we have ample evidence now to show that the interference of cell phones in the learning process and the relationship building process in schools, which actually I think is probably maybe less talked about, but equally important here, that there are higher rates of mental health, stress and anxiety kinds of problems for youth who spend more time on screens. There's less physical activity, which leads to, greater physical health problems and also probably mental health problems as well. So there's all kinds of reasons for us to want to do this. And there's some approaches that Doug Lemov talked about in this article, like I think they're called Yonder bags. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correct, but these like little pouches that schools can have that students put their phone in, and the pouches lock, and there's sort of a secure stowaway system, right? And I think I would probably be more in favor of an approach like that, which would both allow for the potential use of those cell phones at certain times, or certain, types of experiences at school. If we're having a homecoming pep rally or something, do we really want to fight kids about not being able to, use their phone and take pictures and record stuff, and that kind of experience, versus in the middle of second period, in history class, right? So I think we can get creative here. I think we can be humane here in how this happens. And I think ultimately, Manuel, underneath all of this is the idea we have to keep in mind is that cell phone use is not like a natural youth. It's not a natural feature of what it means to be a young person. Okay, there have been young people for thousands and thousands of years, generations upon generations, who did not have cell phones, right? And these young people engaged in things like, gossip and finding, the struggles of finding peer groups and physical and interpersonal conflict and, romantic entanglements and drama. And those are natural things of what it means to be a young person. Cell phone use is some new stuff that these very, very wealthy companies have essentially imposed upon us and tried to help make a world in which we feel like their devices are indispensable so that they can gather massive amounts of data about us and then use that data to enrich themselves and weaponize it against us, to manipulate us into buying stuff that we didn't actually want. So, that's what's happening with the telecommunications industry here. And we don't need to allow our students to be subject to that predatory capitalist influence 24/7, okay? We can take their phones away for parts of the day, including time when you're supposed to be paying attention at school, and that's okay. That is not a violation of their civil rights. That is not going to fundamentally make them less safe, or anything like that. And in fact, we have all kinds of data to show that this could have very, very positive effects, or at least stop the growth and prevalence of some of the most negative things that are happening with young people now. So is this a panacea to solve all of our problems? Absolutely not. Could this be a really good thing that helps with making school more effective in terms of helping students engage and learn and develop healthy relationships? Absolutely. I love it. LOVEIT, exclamation point, exclamation point. We should do it here in America too. Manuel, that is my stance. You, as a high school history teacher, I'm sure encounter student cell phone use on a everyday basis in some form or another. So I'm very curious about your perspective, Manuel.
Yeah, I've definitely been on a journey on this issue, like a lot of teachers, I think. Several years ago, let's say like 5-6 years ago, I was firmly in the camp of let them have their phones and let's teach them how to responsibly use them. I am a high school teacher. I teach high school students, so everything I say regarding this issue is in reference to high school students. I know it certainly is going to be different at the middle school level or elementary level, but for my high school students, I was firmly in the camp of, well, they're going to be in college sometime soon or the workplace sometime soon, and they're going to have to know how to responsibly handle their own phone use. So I was in that camp. And also part of me was like, as long as I make my lesson as engaging as possible and consider ways that the cell phones could actually be used as tools for our learning and what we're doing, like it's going to be this great utopian situation. And the fact is, as you just pointed out, it's multi-billion-dollar corporations behind these. And they're better at engaging young people than I think any educator is. And over time, that battle has been lost. Over time, the battle to help them learn how to responsibly handle their own phone use, that has been lost because these things now are just so addicting. They've come up with such just genius ways to tie somebody to the phone, so much so that their own willpower just simply isn't enough anymore. So I am in the camp of collecting phones. I've been collecting phones this year in each of my classes. Now, at first I was thinking like, hardly anybody probably does this because it seems kind of extreme to have every single student turn in or hand over their phone to you upon the start of class. But then I was watching this Korean zombie drama where it was like a zombie apocalypse at a school. It was, a bunch of teenagers trying to survive a zombie apocalypse, and it was on Netflix. I forget the name of it. It was pretty good. But in any case, these Korean students were walking into the room and like handing their phones to the teacher. The teacher had a little box to keep all the phones, and like that wasn't even a significant part of the plot or anything. It was just like that's just how it was at this school. And I was thinking, maybe there's a lot of schools around the world that do this. And this article here points to the fact that there seems to be schools in many areas of the world that are either collecting phones or flat out banning phones altogether in one way or another. When I have all the students' phones, I have a whole system. I'm not going to get into it here, but if you are a teacher and you're considering this, reach out to me and I could definitely share my experience with it. But I have all their phones in this milk crate situation and all labeled and all that. And that thing, even though I tell them to put it on do not disturb or turn your phone off all the way, man, that thing is buzzing and humming and vibrating all class period. And it's just a reminder to me, like that's what students are fighting against throughout class period. These vibrations, these notifications coming in, and some of them are just meaningless notifications, and others of them are like, friends or family are reaching out to them. I get a lot of family members that try to FaceTime their kids at random hours just to talk about who's going to pick them up after school or whatever. And it's just a mess. It's really a mess. So when I'm engaging in instruction and students don't have access to their phones, it's just like everybody feels the calm that comes with not even having to bother about why it's vibrating in your pocket. And I don't have students resist at all. Like students, they'll complain to me about anything. Like they are very open. High school students, teenagers are pretty opinionated and very open about things that they don't like. And they simply do not complain about my phone policy. I haven't gotten any complaints at all. And I don't even get the daily like, Russ, how about today we could just keep them? Could we just keep them today? I don't even get that. They just hand them over. And most students tell me that that it helps them out and that they think it's a good thing. Because, of course, I check in with them and do anonymous surveys throughout the semester about different issues. And they're with it. So, shout out to the UK for making this happen. If we have any audience members who are in the UK, I would love to get some perspective about like how this is actually expected to work. Is it on teachers? Because that's a problem, because teachers, it's hard to expect teachers individually to like enforce any kind of policy, but especially when it comes to phones. I'm willing to do it because I can't have them with their phones. I just can't. But I wouldn't want that to just be the regular expectation that all teachers are supposed to handle this ban. So I am curious. So if you are in the UK or if you know anything about this particular ban, reach out. I'm curious. But yeah, ban them phones, man. Them things they're not helping. They are not helping.
No. They're absolutely not helping. They're deeply counterproductive in school. And this honestly, Manuel, I think is one of those things that I'm not 100% sure that most families know the full extent of the disruption that cell phones cause in schools. And I agree with you. My trajectory was once perhaps a little more liberal and like, there are good uses for them, but especially now that we're in a world where in most places across the country, access to devices, Chromebooks or laptops or whatever, is so close to universal now that we've gone through the pandemic. There literally is no need for the cell phone. It's just pure distraction, because it's not like back in the day where that was a personal device and you could do research or other kinds of things on it. It's like, you don't need this at all. This is just purely trash and distraction. and so I think if folks really understood that, they would support this wholeheartedly, because they don't want families don't want their kids to be wasting their time and unproductive at school, right? So I think this could be a convergence of interests here that would make sense.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, a lot of the families, I get it. I don't think they realize it either. And some call with the intention of going to voicemail or something, but the kid is like, my mom's calling. So, that's a whole nother mess around. The phones are just a mess, man. They're just a mess. Jeff, let's get to a story that's not messy. Something just cut and dry, because...
We've been dropping little Easter eggs throughout today's episode, so props to anyone who watches this or listens all the way through and catches them. But Manuel, our next grade is an A. Manuel, just a.
There we go.
Now, I was trying to remember if this is a long or a short A. I don't remember by sounds, but it's an A. So
hey, that's perfect. So I could just stack up these A's, so I could go to college and get just enormous amounts of student debt, so I could graduate heavily in debt with no relief in sight. And of course, I can't afford rent or anything like that. But the journey to the American dream all begins with this A on my report card. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Yeah, no, it sure does. The kind of A you would earn if you read lots and lots of books, Manuel.
Yes.
But today's A doesn't stand for that kind of A, Manuel. Today's A stands for an hell no, Scholastic. Do better. Okay, so I don't know if that's a long A or a short A. Sorry to my elementary teachers out there, I forgot. But as many of you have probably heard, we're going to talk about Scholastic on today's episode, because they're just doing some capitulating to troubling forces out there in education. So let's get into this. This story comes to us from an article in Slate, Manuel, and I have lost my article by Rebecca Onion in Slate. And the legendary Scholastic Book Fair is in trouble. For weeks now, librarians have been reporting an odd experience. When they went to order books for this fall's book fairs, they were given the option to, quote, opt in to offer books with LGBTQ plus themes and, quote unquote, diverse storylines. Books in the separate collection included a range of things like graphic novels, books about dragons, a book about Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, a book about Ruby Bridges, and even a Smithsonian, as in the National Museum, Smithsonian book about world history. After news of the checkbox spread rapidly online, Scholastic finally issued a press release in response in mid-October. The company called the idea that their book fairs, quote, put all diverse titles into one optional case, a misconception. Instead, Scholastic said, in order to, quote, protect teachers, librarians, and volunteers who work in states with laws about critical race theory and discussions of LGBTQ plus issues in schools from being fired, sued, or prosecuted, it had created an additional collection called Share Every Story, Celebrate Every Voice, while maintaining that there are still diverse titles throughout every book fair for every age level. Though the statement is mealy-mouthed, that language comes from Slate, which I appreciate, Scholastic is not inventing the threat. A teacher in Georgia was fired over the summer after a parent complaint about her reading to her fifth grade class Scott Stewart's My Shadow is Purple, a book about gender identity that the teacher says she purchased at the school's book fair. And of course, there are other examples of teachers being threatened, teachers being reported to state authorities, or being told to remove books or cover books in libraries. So this is a very real issue. And Manuel, this is a whole hot heaping mess right here. So what say you on this important story?
It's just the irony. I mean, the irony of it, like to have to opt in to share every story. So we're not sharing every story, are we? We're selectively sharing stories, and you have to opt in for the rest of the stories. So forget that share every story category, or however they labeled it, and having to opt into diverse voices, having to opt into marginalized perspectives, having to opt into any of that is, I mean, that is quintessential United States of America, where so many of us have only seen our histories, our voices, our perspectives represented, if at all, through electives or add-ons or like a whole chapter in the textbook on World War II. And then here's a little paragraph about Black people during World War II. And here's a little paragraph about women during World War II. So we have always just been the opt-in if you're interested, which means the default has always been the white lens, the white experience, the white American perspective on the world. That has always been the default. And we still exist in a world now where there are a lot of leaders in education and a lot of folks out there are afraid to say it or simply don't understand it, that the default has always been whiteness. And you can't just like expect it to magically like disappear. You have to stand up to it, and you have to intentionally address it in order to bring in further perspectives. And here Scholastic has an opportunity to do something, and they chose not to do anything. They chose to just continue with the opt-in, continue with the like, well, we don't want people to get in trouble, so we'll just have it there as an option. And that's incredibly disappointing. Like, this is, I mean, what we're seeing from the pro-book ban, the pro-book burning crowd is flat out bullying, flat out trying to attack people, trying to disparage companies like Disney, in this case Scholastic, just flat out bullying, yelling, arguing, trying to get their way. And time after time after time, institutions like Scholastic, like the College Board, are just cowering and caving every single time, trying to placate the bullies and try to find some kind of way that they could placate the bullies and then still just expect the rest of us to support them, still expect us to like support AP African American Studies, even though the College Board totally cowered to Florida, still support Scholastic, even though they are totally cowering to these book burning folks. Like, it's very... we're just not going to get anywhere. We're just not going to get anywhere as a nation, but as an education system in particular, if those who actually have some like real power to do something, if they just keep cowering, and that's all they're doing all the time. And it's very disappointing. And, myself as an educator of color who cares deeply about marginalized perspectives, I just continue to like fight against myself in terms of like trying to maintain hope and belief in educational justice happening anytime soon, or us getting closer to it. Because I look at our show, I look at the folks that we have. I know there's extremely dope folks out there in the education space, a lot of our listeners, a lot of the people that we have on the show. And then I think, the overwhelming majority of folks in the educational space aren't dope like that. Either they don't care or they don't care enough to do something. So I think a lot of teachers out there probably they don't actually like the book bans. They don't actually like what DeSantis is doing and all that. But they're not troubled by it enough to do anything about it. So like Scholastic, I don't think Scholastic likes what's happening, but they're not troubled by it enough to take a stand on it. So it's going to continue to be the folks like we have on our show in our AOTA family stirring up and speaking out, only to continue to remain in the opt-in portion of something like a Scholastic Book Fair. So very disheartening and disappointing.
Yeah, it's deeply disappointing, Manuel, and I'm glad that at least in the sort of librarian, progressive educator online space, they have been called to task on this. Now, it's also important to note that the right-wing extremists the fascist-leaning folks who believe in book bans and want to carry out this sort of campaign of psychological warfare on all of us by erasing identities from children's literature. That they're unhappy with Scholastic's mealy-mouthed, public statement as well, feeling like, you still support grooming or whatever kind of nonsense they're making up now. I think, Manuel, the reality to me is this. The harmful effects of this right-wing extremist push to silence diverse voices and to erase identities in literature and to center only the dominant and majority groups in the ideas and the worldview and the sort of landscape of thought that exists in our nation's public schools is an attack. It is a form of psychological warfare on us all. And it stands to do real harm. It stands to do harm from the standpoint of making, in particular, Black, brown, folks of color, as well as LGBTQ plus folks, feel less than because we would not see ourselves represented. It is an attempt to glorify whiteness, maleness, Christianness, the sort of things that they want to put at the center of the narrative. The great white American man who made freedom and justice and truth and this kind of thing. And so, this is an outright attack. And it is Scholastic capitulating to that. Now, only partially capitulating because they do allow the opt-in and you could still, get access to these titles. But of course, they're putting up barriers and they are ostracizing these materials from the quote unquote norm, right? And so this is an extremely harmful thing. And the reality is, Manuel, Scholastic is not going to, win favor with those folks by doing this halfway approach, right? Those folks are still going to call Scholastic a bunch of communists who want to turn your kids trans or whatever nutty ideas that they're going to share. And at the same time, they're doing harm to us by this type of policy. So what these folks should do and need to do is say, no, this is the ethical thing for us to do. If you would like to go through and remove titles that your crazy, nutty right-wing laws have made illegal in your state, like books about Ruby Bridges or books about a Supreme Court justice or books about, dragons or books about different types of families that are real types of families that actually exist in the real world, like families with disabled children and families with two dads and families with, grandparents who are raising kids and, all this kind of stuff. Like, that's your prerogative. It's sad and disturbing and unfortunate and a huge waste of time and resources and offensive and terrible. But you, I suppose, legally have the right to go and do that. But we are not going to change the entire narrative, the entire discussion about children's literature across the country, which Scholastic does because they have a near monopoly on these types of book fairs in schools. And in the cultural sense, they are essentially the identity of these kinds of experiences. The article referred to them as although they're probably not quite at the level of Disney, they, in this space, in the book fairs at school space, they are like Disney, right? They are the sort of the brand that everyone knows, the brand that everyone associates with if it has that title, it's probably good for my kids. It's okay, it's not going to be dangerous for them or that sort of thing. So for them to make this stance is a capitulation to the elements in our society who are wanting to dehumanize, who are pushing a hateful and ultimately a violent agenda against people and families. And it's wrong, and they should do better. And so I'm glad they're getting this type of pushback. I don't expect, to be honest, Manuel, that they will change. But I hope that what they see from this approach is that it is both wrong and it is not financially beneficial to them, because there's a sort of viral video out there of a librarian going through all these titles, and a number of them she points out kids love these books, these would fly off the shelves, right? And so suppressing titles that would fly off the shelves is not good for the bottom line either. So my hope is that we see some convergence of interest, because that's all Scholastic's really going to respond to, between what is right and what will also generate book sales, which is books that actually speak to the fullness of the audience that you are preaching to, which in America's public schools is now a majority children of color. So these nutty conservative folks can go to private school if they don't want to learn about actual human beings and human society, and they want to live under a rock. That is certainly their right, Manuel. But we should not be capitulating to these folks in the way we are, and this, like the critiques we've offered of the College Board in the past, is just another step in the sort of, I wouldn't even call it a slow, the now steady and escalating march towards very problematic far right-wing policies intruding into public education. And for what it's worth, I really hope Scholastic makes a different choice on this matter going forward. I'm not holding my breath, but we do need institutions like this to do the right thing, Manuel, and to stand up to these forces and say, no, we're not going to capitulate.
Everybody who does capitulate and tries to find a so-called middle ground, like you said, they end up beating, they don't win the favor of the right anyways. Like the College Board capitulated, they're still being trashed by the right. Scholastic, here they have this, quote, mealy mouth response, and they're still going to be targeted by the right. So like, no matter what you do, they're still going to come after you. So you might as well stand firm in your values and who you are. Just stand firm. You're not helping yourself by trying to appease the bullies. The bullies will never stop. All right. So if I am to summarize today's Do Now, I guess it's a ban phones, not books. Ban phones, not books, people. That's
good. That's a good T-shirt. We should get an all the above T-shirt, Manuel. Ban phones.
Yeah,
in
but
schools,
I think there's some. There probably is going to be some disagreement over the ban phones part. I'm sure many in our AOTA family are not on our side when it comes to banning phones. But we'll see. We'll see what people say. I don't know. Ban them things, man. Ban phones, not books, people. All right. Up next, we have our seminar. Super dope guest in the building, Dr. Orange, to talk to us about the school leadership administrator perspective on just leading and fighting the good fight in these current times. All right, that's coming up next. Stay tuned.
Hey folks, thanks so much for tuning in to All the Above. We really appreciate you. And as you know, All the Above is a small operation. It's just me and just Manuel, that's it. We have no sponsorships, which means we are totally dependent on our amazing audience to help support the show. So here's what you can do. Go to our website, which is aotashow.com/support. That's aotashow.com/support. There you can find links to everything you can do to support the show. You find all the links to every platform that we're on where you can like, subscribe, follow. Make sure you share our show with your whole network. Also, you can donate there. We are on Venmo. We're on Cash App, and most importantly, you can find the link to our Anchor page where you can become a monthly patron. Even a small donation once a month will make a huge difference in helping us continue to produce the show. Lastly, you can find there the link to get your flyest, best, latest, all the above show merch. Okay, all you got to do is go to aotashow.com/support. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of the show. All right, folks, welcome to today's seminar. Thanks so much for joining us. And we are absolutely thrilled to have with us today an amazing guest. Our streak of having only the dopest guests here and All the Above is fully intact today with Dr. Tonikiaa Orange from UCLA, who's back with us to talk about all things related to school administrators. Welcome back to All the Above, Dr. Orange.
Thank you. I'm glad that I'm one of your guests that you're happy to have back. So I appreciate it very much.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Absolutely. Well, folks, let me tell you a little bit more about our guest. Dr. Tonikiaa Orange serves as director for the Culture and Equity Project and is a director for the Principal Leadership Institute at UCLA's Center X. She is an expert in culturally responsive pedagogy, and her work focuses on preparing the next generation of social justice leaders to transform and create equitable and culturally responsive educational spaces for all students. Prior to her time at UCLA, Dr. Orange was a math and science teacher and principal of a K-8 school in Los Angeles that was specifically designed to serve standard English learners through culturally and linguistic responsive pedagogy. Dr. Orange received her EDD in Administrative and Policy Studies with a concentration in evaluation from the University of Pittsburgh and holds a master's degree from both Teachers College and UCLA. She also is a fantastic partner to work with that I have some privilege of working with her on a regular basis. So Dr. Orange, so great to have you. And I'm going to kick it over to Manuel for our first question.
Manuel, before you get started, let me just say this. I know I have to change my bio because I'm not an expert on anything. I know a lot of stuff, but I need to change that. So I just want to get that out of the way. All right. Let's go.
Understood. Well, thank you for taking time out for being here with us on All of the Above for a second time to share some school leadership dopeness with us, some UCLA dopeness with us. And we want to start by just talking about the fact that the work of a school administrator, a principal, school leaders more generally, is continuing to get more and more complex since the days of the height of the pandemic. And we're still seeing this narrative being pushed about so-called learning loss and emphasis on boosting those test scores, and it's feeling real no child left behind-ish in some of these parts. And it seems like some of the discussion around culturally responsive education and SEL practices seems to be fading into the background. So we are interested in hearing from you about how school leaders should navigate these complex times and navigate the balancing of responsibility with expectations in this emerging post-pandemic-ish environment that we're in.
Okay, well, you both know me, so I'm going to speak authentically and just say it how I see it and how I feel, right from the heart. I guess the first thing that comes to mind is just the whole notion of learning loss. And I know Jeffrey and I have spoken about this before. When has there not been whatever they call learning loss? Like, what is that? We're talking about the same kids. We keep adding groups of that who aren't, benefiting inside of our spaces and who are being marginalized. So there's always been some type of learning loss. It's nothing new. I don't even like the term learning loss because, again, people weren't learning to begin with. And if they were learning, they were learning things that were probably maybe like, what do I want to say? Like not good for the soul. Maybe not good for the soul to walk in spaces. Just wasn't a good space. So I don't know about the notion of learning loss. I think it's a ridiculous way for us to think about it. Now, we can say students are continuously not thriving in spaces. Now, that is for true, because, that's true. They haven't been thriving in a long time. So it's nothing new for principals to be bombarded with the notion that students are learning, students are doing well. This is a narrative that we've heard long, tried and true. I do think, and so because it's not a new narrative, I think principals walk into it like they walked into anything else. Just like the banning of books is not a new narrative. It's just all of the stuff is like cyclical, right? It comes back around. So, principals are walking into a space that they've walked into before, and they end up learning how to navigate it like their predecessors have done before. I will say that from my perspective, if you are a administrator and trying to really truly support and serve students and the communities that they come from, being culturally responsive or understanding social and emotional learning around that are all packaged into one. There is no academic success without being responsive to the students that you serve, but also recognizing that being culturally responsive and is just a tool in itself. It literally is the mindset that students don't learn if they're not loved, if they are not feeling in a good space, if they feel like walking into school is trauma ridden. And so leaders have to deal with that. That is what they're dealing with. Like, how do I continuously create a space, this space of care that I'm caring for folks, and that includes their staff as well in hard times that, again, there'll be more hard times to come. And at the same time, recognizing that I cannot, there won't be any academic success or any social and emotional success unless I tend to who people are and how they feel inside the spaces. So I think how we think about it is that is what you have to train, you have to think about first. And I think that leaders have to gain a certain language to be able to speak about why that is important, that they have to navigate this by focusing on things, as my other colleague, Joanne Iskin would say, on what's micro versus the macro, like what I can control. I can't control every single thing that happens that comes down from the state that tells me to focus on this, but I can focus on how people feel when they walk inside of my space. I can shift the way we think about professional development. I can decide how we want to think about what is equitable inside of my space and who's not benefiting inside of that space, and work on those things. That I can do. So the focus on issues that you can control, understanding again how you can politically subvert, because leaders of color particularly, but all leaders who work in spaces where students are marginalized have had to do that from the beginning of schooling, and recognizing the language you use to make sure that you are able to speak, clearly that there is no success inside of the educational space if we don't attend to how people feel when they walk inside of that space. It's just the number one thing. It's just the number one thing. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I very much appreciate that, Dr. Orange. The worry that I think I feel on a pretty constant basis is that we're slipping back towards some of the problematic practices from the past, from the relatively recent past under No Child Left Behind, that we so clearly saw were just ineffective, but they seem to be kind of reascending in some ways. The overemphasis on testing, the kind of drifting towards the narrowing of the curriculum, and the doubling down just on ELA and math, and it has new language and new window dressing, but I feel like we're veering back in that direction in a way that is we know doesn't work and wasn't helpful for us. And even the more conservative, folks in education understood it wasn't good. So my hope is that cooler heads will prevail, and a more sensible approach, in my opinion, that I think you're naming, carries the day in the end. But we're certainly, on the edge, one could say right now. Another area where we are perhaps on the edge has to do with kind of representation and diversity among the ranks of school leaders, and this I know is an issue is very close to your heart. So I wanted to start off by sharing a little bit of statistical data. So nationally, about 7% of the teaching force is Black. Approximately 11% of principals across the country are Black, while about 15% of our student population is Black. This, of course, is in the nation's public schools. Now, those gaps are significantly larger when you consider some other groups, in particular Latinos. 14% of principals identify as Latino, while nearly 30% of our students do so. In a world in which now more than half of the nation's public schools are made up of children of color, and particularly in light of the recent Supreme Court decision around affirmative action, what do you think are the most kind of important factors that are preventing us from having better representation in our administrative ranks among communities of color, representation that looks more like the student populations that we serve?
Well, I'm sitting here at UCLA, and I can even remember thinking about this when I was at Teachers College, Columbia University. I can remember asking my colleagues who I was in the master's program with, why didn't they want to just continue to pursue and go on to teaching? Part of it was, the notion of pay. Spend all this time in school and to come out and go into teaching, and then after a teacher become a principal and an administrator and not make very much more money than teachers if you've been there for a long time. The other part was that I recognized that when a lot of my peers ended up, by the time they got to graduate school, that the other options were just more viable for them. There was more money for them to even go and get to go off to, whether it was to, their doctorate degree in something, go off to, I mean, a couple went to be doctors. There was just more money that way geared toward them to go to school and to pay for schooling. One thing that we notice for folks who are coming into our programs to become principals, and UCLA, we're unique. The majority of the folks that come in the principal leadership are folks of color. That is the majority of our program. Finances is the number one issue for them. Like, how do I become a principal? Because I want to go back and become a principal in the spaces where I teach, but I also cannot have the financial burden that is left with going to a program, programs to get credentialed. There are more credentialing, even though the state may say we want to diversify more of our administration pool, the constant politics of having different assessments that they have to acquire, just added on certifications that people need to do it. It just makes it much more difficult to actually get, move through. And I, this is a huge concern of mine here in California, particularly, where it has become more and more difficult to recruit folks of color to go into leadership roles. And I don't want anybody of color leaving in debt to do it. I think we have to have more funding for it. This is something that I know our own dean and other folks have spoken about this very openly about this, and in spaces that where, people who can make decisions. There's not a lot of money and space for folks to become administrators. And we, as much as I want that, because of representation actually does matter, I don't see, and this is just honest, I just don't, that's just a hurdle. I'm not positive how to overcome that. Our demographics also look very different in California. So just even thinking about our AAPI principals, just the recruitment there, of course, our Latino population and our Black population is extremely small, and as the teaching population dwindles, the less and less folks of color actually come into that to the field of administration. So it is really hard. I wish, I don't know. I'm wondering, what do you all even think? Because there's plenty of conferences about how do we diversify it. And again, it looks different than it looks in Philadelphia. It looks different than it looks in, Charlotte, North Carolina. California is kind of unique in the way we think about the way our demographic trends are shifting. So it is constantly on my mind. And we've tried a couple things, but the bottom line really comes down when I've talked to folks about this, even our own students, it comes to, hey, why would I do that when I already make that much as a teacher? Why would I move through on the administration ranks? More responsibility, more load on me. And the other thing is, if I come, I need money to help me get through school. And is there financial support to help me so I'm not strapped with the burden of going to get my admin credential, because there are fees to the test they have to take and all those things. So, I think it would be. And the last thing is, again, even with the banning and all of the politics that goes on, principals of color particularly have dealt with these things before. It's not, it feels very, very new because it's in our face right now. But behind the scenes, there's always been folks complaining about the books that you show kids in school. There's always been complaints about those things. It's just really heightened right now. But the stress of it, and there's not a lot of support for principals once they become principals. The support is geared towards, sort of like you all just said, what are high test scores? I need you to make sure students are academically successful. And that's the only thing that people are focused on. The stress of being a principal is overwhelming. And without anything in place to support them when they get into the position, the turnover, I think, will just continuously be there. And we won't get most other folks to try to come into the profession. And it's a constant conversation across the country about diversifying, your leadership. I don't know how to solve that. I mean, I don't, again, we can't solve it, but how do we make little steps towards, moving towards it? Yeah, that's a tough one. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm in my 20th year now as a classroom teacher, and I remember my first 2 years as a classroom teacher, my administrators at that particular school site trying to kind of groom me into becoming a future principal. And I remember thinking like it was clear from my interactions with them that it was because like from their perspective, I ran a tight ship. I had the toughest kids on campus, and they all loved my class, and there was no discipline problems. And it seemed very much to be about the sort of stereotypical black male as a disciplinarian on the school site. So I was like, well, I don't want any part of that. And then it was No Child Left Behind, so it was all the pressure about test scores. I'm like, I don't want any part of that either. So that's not for me. And now, of course, I'm 20 years deep, and I'm in a place now where I see sort of have a different perspective on school leadership, and I see it not being about discipline and test scores so much, but it just looks like a not fun experience. Like it just looks like any administrator that I look at is just like burning the candle on both ends. And the sustainability part is what I want to ask you about here. Nationally, it's about something like 20% of principals that don't return after the school year, and some go on to other roles, but some just are burnt out. And just looking at all the expectations and requirements and all that administrators do, I'm not sure why any classroom teacher would want to do that. So would love to hear your perspective on just the sustainability, like what practices, what could we do perhaps to make the role of a school site principal more sustainable, so that perhaps they do stick around, and maybe other folks would be more interested in pursuing that as a possibility.
I mean, just so happens today we have some of our alumni here. It's Saturday, so they're here on Saturday. And we have what we call the forum. And it is a way and a space for our former students who are in leadership roles or moving into leadership roles to come together. And it's a private space for them to talk about, what am I struggling with? I just need community. I just need to be back with the folks who understand where I'm coming from. Because very often when they're out in the field, that's not what they get. It goes back to, even their directors telling them what's the test scores and how do we reclassify folks. It goes back to all of that checklist type of stuff. And we know that just even having a space to be able to do that, we're fortunate that we do that, is a way to sustain their soul, a way to sustain their mission and their own philosophy around why they do the work they do, because they all go into the work saying, I really want to change things. I really want things to be better. I really want to build these cultures where people care about one another, where students walk in class and say, I'm glad to be here today. And teachers walk in and say, you know what? Might have been jacked up yesterday, but today it is great, right? You want to feel that space, but it can wear you down. And so to sustain principals, I think they have to have spaces that just let them come and can be, again, with like-minded folks, to not just talk about shop, but also to talk about how they feel and walk into those spaces, and how they themselves sometimes feel like an imposter. They themselves feel like, they have to deal with issues of race and issues of positionality inside of those spaces as well. And so that's one thing I think that's important to sustain. But again, not every program has things like that. Those things cost money. Those things cost manpower to do. So it's a constant grind on even like leadership programs to make sure they find the spaces to do those for them. And it is expected from the CTC, the California Teaching Commission, that you provide those things. I think the other thing is just, we always have this saying that it would be great if we can just take the Principal Leadership Institute folks at UCLA and just push them into like an area, like at the partnership schools. Like we just want to put a bunch of PLI folks there, because the more we feel that we have folks that are in PLI that are in a space together, they can shift and change. And I think helping leaders think about, again, just the micro changes and not the macro is just so important, because I think if they focus on the things that they don't have control, it is easy to burn out and it is easy to leave. But if you focus on the things and you have a good group around you, you can move the needle and say, you know what, I might not have had 10 things happen right, but just let me show you how this has moved a little bit and how we're moving towards that. And so I think they need good teams around them, which ultimately means the way we think about what leadership looks like in schools should be different. It should, a principal can't do everything, and they need people in there that actually are able to help them. So that's a whole way of thinking about how we structure schools. And, that's a whole structure of school issue. It's not an education issue, because that those are two separate things, right? But it's the way we think about schooling and how we have it structured. So for right now, for me, the biggest thing is just the best way I know to support them is to make sure that there's spaces they can come to with like-minded people and can rejuvenate themselves so they can go back out and do the work. Because every now and then, all of us have gotten to the point where, like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I just don't know. And you just need to be able to talk to somebody and say, well, today you may not, but maybe tomorrow you can. And I'm sure teaching is not the only profession that's like that. I'm sure doctors probably feel the same way. And I have friends who are lawyers and like, why did I decide to do this? And you need that space. So I think those are important for our leaders now and future leaders to have.
Yeah. Yeah, that very much resonates, Dr. Orange. And I think a thread of that, sort of challenge of sustainability for school leaders often has to do with the stress that you named and the very sort of personal responsibility that so many folks I know who become school leaders feel towards the work, that everything that's happening in the school building is ultimately their responsibility, and that the sort of vision and this Herculean task of transforming a massive organization inside of an even more massive system with centuries of inertia to try to do right by students and the community that we serve, that they feel the weight of that resting squarely on their shoulders. And that's not to say it also doesn't rest on the shoulders of other people in the school building, but as the principal or as an administrator at a site, you feel perhaps a unique level of responsibility for every single thing. And that's just a tremendously difficult responsibility to bear. And it also comes from a very, very deeply held set of values. And I think that kind of parlays into the next question, which is you're the director of the Principal Leadership Institute at UCLA, as we mentioned, and your program has a very sort of clear and firm stance around what needs to happen in order for aspiring administrators to learn and gain the foundation that they need to become social justice leaders. And I'm wondering if you can share with us your perspective, the Center X perspective on what does that mean to be a social justice leader, and what are some of the features of your program that embody that or speak to that as folks are preparing to become administrators.
I think there are just two things that the principal leadership, I mean, there are a lot of things that we do, but these two things I think are the most important ones. I think the first one is I'm taking this language from an elder who's a poet in Leimert Park, who just said this the other day, and I think it epitomizes what we believe at UCLA and for the Principal Leadership Institute, which is that when we talk about social justice, we really talk about how vulnerable our folks can be to bring all of their understandings of their own identities to the forefront. That when you can do that as a school leader, that you are then able to be more culturally responsive. You are then to be more aware of who folks are and their needs, social and emotional, that without the understanding of the vulnerability, that it's very difficult for you to be, a social justice leader as per se. So for us, it is about vulnerability. It's about bringing that to the forefront. It's about interrogating your own beliefs first and foremost. And then it's about having and being open to the tension and building relationships with others where tension can arise, where, again, other folks are able to be vulnerable so you can solve the hard issues that you have to solve. And not solve them, but that you can move towards progress on the difficult and complex issues that take place inside of a school building. And so that's how I like to think about what we do. It's like we ask our folks who come into our space that you need to be vulnerable and you have to interrogate your own ideas and beliefs first and foremost. I think the second thing we ask folks to do is to think about the language that they use inside of school spaces and to ask the right questions. And because I always say that if you can leave with the language to interrogate when someone walks into your room and ask you why you're doing this, or to respond to someone, and you can do it again with vulnerability, with a sense of confidence in it, understanding that you ask the questions that nobody else in the room is willing to ask, then you come out stronger. You come out feeling like, it may not work, but I'm on a trajectory anyway to just have this whole notion of leadership and social justice is all an inquiry process, and that we just continue to move on and grow as we move together. And I think another thing is that we literally, I think in our program, we model what it is we think we want leaders to be. Just last week, with everything that's happening in the world, I actually went in and the question I asked the class was, I'm the leader of the Principal Leadership Institute. As a school leader, I need you all to help me figure out, should I write a statement about anything that's going on or should I not? And so part of the reason I asked the question is one, that it's not a yes or no answer. It is really something that you think through. You are vulnerable when you share your own experiences and your own identity, and people in the room spoke, and we have a great space in this space that you see where identities and beliefs come out. And then at the end, we make a decision together, again, recognizing that it may be right, it may be wrong. But the thing is that this is how we want our leaders to go into a space, not coming in thinking that, they have all the answers, but we need help. We have to ask it. We have to create the space for folks to speak in spaces of tension, in spaces of disagreement. And then we have to be at the end, we have to say, all right, now we've heard where we're all coming from and our own values and beliefs, but the bottom line is, what do we still do as a school leader and to move this community forward? And this navigating of their own ideologies and how they have to move as a school leader is, I think, something we do really well in the Principal Leadership Institute, because we model it. Every single class, this is what we try to model for them. And I think that's what they would speak to when they left. And I think that's the stuff that carries on with them. It's how are we building relational trust? How are we interrogating our own understanding of why we believe what we believe? Because that's how we lead. And so we need to interrogate that, right? And then how do we bring our own vulnerabilities to the surface so that folks feel also comfortable that they can speak in spaces of tension? Because most of the issues that we have to solve are not what the things that we can see. I always say it's the stuff we can't see. So if we're not willing to be in a space where we can talk about issues of race, issues of class, issues of differences in culture, then what are we talking about? Because there's nothing in school that we do that all that stuff impacts it. You can't talk about discipline without talking about race. You can't talk about, reclassification if you're not willing to talk about issues of race and culture and bias and positionality, but we don't. So how can we sit in a space if you're not willing to do that? And so that is what we really focus on. How do you do that? And how do you keep folks moving forward and not get caught up in the anger so much, but we still have to lead, and we still have folks that are being marginalized and not benefiting in the space. So how do we move forward as leaders? And so I think that's what we do. That's what we do in the Principal Leadership Institute.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Orange, that was great. Thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure to have you back with us today and explore some of these important topics that I think resonate with a lot of people, and also folks might not always think of them through the lens of being a school administrator, but maybe more through the teacher lens. So very much appreciate you joining us to help us explore these topics today. And of course, we look forward to having you back again someday for a third time here on all the above. So thank you, Dr. Orange, for joining us.
Thank you both so very much. Bye.
All right, folks, that's it for today's seminar. Thanks so much for joining us, but stick around. Next up is our Class Dismissed.
All right, folks, now it's time for Class Dismissed. It's the time of the episode where we like to shout out folks doing wonderful things in the world of education. And this time we want to shout out a young learner out there, a young student. Of course, the youth always give us hope that we're heading in the right direction. Jeff, what do we have for today's Class Dismissed?
Well, Manuel, we have a fascinating story today about a 14-year-old from Virginia who has just garnered a new title as America's most promising young scientist. This is a young black man from Virginia who has developed a soap that will help treat melanoma. So yeah, think about what you were doing at the age of 14, folks. But let's get into a little more detail here. So this young man, his name is Heman Bakele, is a ninth grader at W.T. Woodson High School in Annandale, Virginia, was awarded a $25,000 grand prize as the winner of the 2023 3M Young Scientist Challenge with his melanoma treatment in the form of a bar soap. As the winner of the nation's premier middle school science contest, which is now in its 16th year, Bakele has been accorded the prestigious title of America's top young scientist. Now, this young man was spurred on to do this work after realizing that there are starkly different recovery rates for people suffering from melanoma in the United States versus sub-Saharan Africa. In the United States, recovery rates are, in the 90 percentile range or above, and in sub-Saharan Africa, it's down in the 20s. And of course, the costs of treatment are a huge barrier to folks actually accessing that treatment. Hence, his idea of a relatively affordable, accessible soap that helps stimulate, and I'm sure I'm going to mess up the science here, Manuel, but helps stimulate cells in the body that fight melanoma or help prevent melanoma. So exciting concept. Just great to see this type of genius and brilliance flowing forth from the community, Manuel, and big props to Heman Bakele, America's top young scientist, for working on this amazing project.
Yeah, I love that. Black excellence. Science in the building. That's super dope. Yeah, I definitely wasn't doing any of that. When I was 14 years old. I don't even know. What science class did I even have when I was 14? I think it was like a geography. No, it wasn't geography. It was where we learned about earthquakes and such. Earth science, I think, is what I had. I don't even know if they still have that in the high school level. Yeah. Anyways, I wasn't inventing ways to address melanoma and cost-effective ways to address melanoma. I don't think 14-year-old me had much concept about melanoma or the differences, the disparities in melanoma treatment between here and sub-Saharan Africa. Damn, young people, man, they're brilliant. They're great. Shout out to that young man. And shout out to anybody who is still listening or watching all of the above. Thank you for sticking with us all the way to the very end. I think those who are still with us, those are the ones who believe in bell-to-bell instruction. They go all the way to the end. And I love you for that. Do remember, all of our content is available at our website, AOTAshow.com. And if you appreciated anything about today's conversation, let us know. Also, thumbs up, 5 stars, all that good stuff. It's been a minute since we've gotten like a slew of written reviews in Apple Podcasts. So we would very much appreciate you taking 30 seconds to just type a little something. 5 stars, great show. Every dope educator should listen. I don't know, something like that. But in any case, remember, we love y'all. And we'll be back next week with either a passing period or a full episode or something. And just remember, I don't even know what we say at the end, Jeff. Shout out to anybody who's still listening to me bumble the ending. But we'll check you out next time. Yeah.